sounds a lot better than we usually do.
Alright, chums up.
Ready, guys?
Let's do this. Leroy Dragons!
Oh my god, he just ran in.
Hey everybody, and welcome back for episode 18 of LFR, the casual podcast for casual players of World of Warcraft, where we make the lore of Warcraft more accessible than Arthas' friend zone. Sorry, Jaina. We're your hosts, Sirithe
and Dracoris. LFR usually stands for Looking for Raid, but today it stands for Lordaeron's Favourite Rom-Com. Because you just know people were talking about Arthas and Jaina like it was the hottest telenovela going, right? Right? So, thank you all for joining us for another dive into an aspect of lore in the World of Warcraft. Today is part 2 of what we envisage being a 3-part series. Might even end up being 4 now, we'll see. Looking into one of Warcraft lore's most popular and polarising characters, Prince Arthas Menethil / the Lich King. Last time we talked about his early years, from his youth right up to his induction into the Paladin Order of the Silver Hand. We met Invincible, and tragically lost him again, due to Arthas' stupidity. It was a whole thing.
And he still hasn't dropped for me.
Yeah. This week, we're going to talk about Arthas' career as a paladin and as a prince. But before we get into that...
You love me! You really love me!
So we don't have any new reviews this week, which is totally cool. But if you want to leave us a review, you can do that either on your chosen podcast provider or the Warcraft Radio directory. And we also have our amazing AOTC patrons who will be getting their names read out each and every week until they decide we aren't worth the money anymore. So we've got the Great Mud from Gratz, Sky Shrouder, sorry about that, buddy, Anna, Gershom, and Discordian Kitty. Thank you guys so much for your support. It means the absolute world to us. I know our release schedule has been a little funky, first with the lawsuit and then just real life, but we've got a new schedule set up. We're going to be back on track.
We're going to be back on track until at least January when I start my new job, at which point God knows what we're going to do. No, we'll make it work. We'll make it work.
We'll figure it out. We're semi-professionals.
We got this.
If you want to join them and our other amazing patrons, please do sign up at patreon.com/LFRWildcast. Now, I believe we have a little bit of news this week. So, not much news in the WoW realm that we have collected, which doesn't mean there isn't any. But one thing we did want to mention was there was a massive leak with Twitch. Pretty much every password, every stream key, pretty much every bit of data Twitch has been leaked. So I do recommend, if you are a member on Twitch, be that as a streamer, as, somebody who's just watching streams, probably go in and change your password and add the two-factor authentication, which I myself have gone ahead and done as well.
Yeah, I had two-factor authentication anyway because I'm anal like that. But also, one of the things that was interesting about this leak, of course, is that we now know how much everybody earns on Twitch as well. So I don't want to hear anybody sort of giving it stacks about how women are ruining Twitch, because when you look at the list of people and what they've been earning, it is... I think someone did a countdown and you had to get to 42 from the top before there was even a woman in the list. It is ridiculous, and I think we should all be going out of our way to try and support, some more female creators, but also, people of colour and what have you, because of the top 100 creators on Twitch in terms of how much they're getting paid, they're all white. And it's ridiculous.
And if you want two amazing women streamers to follow, go follow Frasley and Lex. Mm-hmm. Well, Lex_rants, because... both of their streams are very great, inclusive places, and they're always a blast.
Absolutely.
But with that, we should probably get to the lore.
And how is education supposed to make me feel smarter? Besides, every time I learn something new, it pushes some old stuff out of my brain.
Okay, so, as you all know, every week I ask my partner Lou what she knows about the topic at hand. This week, I asked her again what she knows about Arthas Menethil. Obviously, we did that last week. This week, she mentioned that he has a horse, which she didn't mention last week, and I don't think she's actually listened to the last episode yet, so I'm pretty impressed she managed to dredge something new out of her head. If I ask again next week, I'll probably get something thrown at me, but I'm going to do it anyway for science. I'll let you know how that goes.
Maybe next week should be the first time we ask her live, so I can watch you get something thrown at you.
I'll tell you what, if we ever manage to find a time that we can record when she's actually available, that would be great. But, so look.
Transatlantic podcasts are fun.
Yeah, they are. A transatlantic podcast when we both have small children. It's difficult. So look. After last episode, and please, if you are someone who is for some reason picking us up for the first time this episode, go and listen to last episode, because this is not going to make much sense otherwise. So look, after last episode, we know who Arthas was, as a kid and as a teen. We know he became a paladin, even if neither he nor the Light seemed especially sure about that. Where we left him, Arthas had just decided that he wanted to do something fun with all of his power and privilege. So what did he do? Let's find out.
Now is not the time for this.
So, we actually start this part of our story with Jaina. She has a little encounter with Kael'thas, Sunstrider, who is the subject of our episode 11. And I think we actually talked about that encounter in that episode, but what comes out of it is that it's very clear that, one, Kael is into Jaina. He is down bad. And two, Jaina is not so into Kael. She respects him. She likes him. She thinks he's pretty, but he's too old for her and makes her feel a little uncomfortable. After Kael...
Yeah, there's quite an age gap there.
Yeah, there is. Even though it doesn't really look like it, because, elves have the whole ethereal beauty thing going on. But after Kael leaves, someone puts their hands over Jaina's eyes from behind and says, "Guess who?" Well, it smells like horses, so it's not a difficult guess. It's Arthas. And what is he using his power and privilege to do? The question I left you all with last episode? Of course, he's using his power and privilege to visit Jaina in Dalaran, under the pretense of wishing to learn about magic, history, and all the other things a king needs to know.
And just to clarify, Dracoris is not just making a joke about Arthas loving horses there. It's literally in the book that Jaina identifies that he smells like horses.
Yeah. She also feels his hands and recognises the ring he's wearing, but I think it's much funnier to focus on the horse thing.
Yeah.
Now, Arthas admits within about 10 seconds that he doesn't really give a shit about all the stuff he's supposed to be learning in Dalaran. The reason he's there is Jaina. So, we then cut to a formal dinner where all the bigwigs of Dalaran are present, as well as Arthas and Kael. And Jaina, who is the lowest ranked person at the table, is there, and she suspects that she's only there because Kael wants her to be there, which she does not like. There's a direct quote in the book, and it says, "She wants to succeed on her own merit, not to be advanced because an elven prince enjoyed her company." Very, very girl power.
I'll play devil's advocate here against Jaina, because I think she's got some imposter syndrome going on there. And that she's really there because, A, she's already pretty much a badass mage, and B, she's the Archmage Antonidas' apprentice already. So yeah, he would probably want her there.
I think that's definitely a sensible way to look at it. I think there are probably several sides to it, in truth, because Antonidas is a mage. He's a very old mage, and he doesn't put up with bullshit very well. And I can absolutely see him wanting Jaina there, both to help conversation flow and what have you. You've got to remember that Jaina is from essentially a royal family herself. Her dad rules Kultiras at this point, Lord Admiral Dalen Proudmoore. And so, if you've got royals at your dinner table for the first time in ages, in Kael'thas and Arthas, I can absolutely understand why Antonidas might want Jaina there. As well as the fact that she's a badass and that she's his apprentice. There are a lot of reasons. But I also wouldn't put it past Kael to have asked for her to be there either.
True.
So talk at the table turns to the internment camps fairly quickly. Kael basically wants them to kill all the orcs. And he's got reasonably good reasons for that. You know, they burnt his forest to the ground with the help of dragons and shit. They killed a lot of his friends and family. I can understand why he would feel that way. But he basically, they're complaining about the internment camps, and he says, well, you wouldn't have to pay for these internment camps if you just killed all the fucking orcs. And Jaina butts in and asks whether Chaol has actually seen the internment camps. Kelthus isn't used to being interrupted particularly, but he admits that he hasn't seen them, and he says that surely a refined lady such as Jaina wouldn't want to see them either. Jaina's response is pretty great. She says, while His Highness gives me a lovely compliment, I do not think that refinement has any bearing on one's desire to see justice. Indeed, I think it rather more likely that a refined individual would not wish to see sentient beings slaughtered like animals. I mean, one, that's, you know, Jaina 1, Chaol 0. But 2, like, we'll just file that under opinions Jaina may want to revisit post-Theramore, because murdering all the orcs like animals is pretty much what she wants to do at that point in the story. And actually, you know, Chaol at the moment is feeling similarly to how Jaina feels post-Theramore. You know, the orcs trashed his homeland at the end of the day, and I think this is a pretty good situation for, you know, Jaina just doesn't have the experience that Chaol does at that point. And actually, when the tables do turn as she goes through something similar, her opinion will be changing. But interestingly, the reason Antonidas brought it up in the first place was because he wanted to talk about the way the orcs were becoming lethargic. He had intelligence that indicated, correctly, that the orcs were in withdrawal from demon blood. Kelthus then has his moment for massive dramatic irony, given what happens with him in Burning Crusade, because he goes off on one about, even if such a theory is correct, why should we care about them? They were foolish enough to trust demons. They were thoughtless enough to permit themselves to become addicted to corruptive energies. I can't even be bothered to read the rest, but basically, Kelthus is full of shit, right? Kelthus has no sympathy for these orcs who are addicted to fel. And if we flash forward, maybe, is it 10, 15 years from now? Kelthus is going to be gibbering in the corner, addicted to fel.
And it's already ironic at this time because his people are already addicted to magic, just not the fel. They're addicted to arcane.
But they don't realise they're addicted because they haven't had to deal without it yet. Yeah, you're right. Massive.
Don't worry, Chaol. You'll be scratching your neck pretty soon.
Massive dramatic irony there. So talk then turns to royal gossip. And Antonidas asks Arthas about his status as Lordaeron's most eligible bachelor. Arthas says that there's plenty of time for such things, and Jaina is disappointed, but resolves to throw herself into her studies. We then cut to a few days later where Jaina is trying to study, but Arthas drags her out for... Any guesses? A horseback ride, that's right. She tries to protest, but honestly, and this is a bit of a theme here, Arthas doesn't really hear the word no very often. She says, Arthas, you'll be a magnificent king one day. No one can seem to deny you anything. That line's important because he will be holding it against her later. Now, they have a...
Just like a true douchebag.
Yeah, he retained that one in his head to use at her most vulnerable moment, and we'll get there later. So they have a picnic lunch and they fall asleep. And when Jaina wakes up, Arthas is gone. Turns out he climbed to the top of a nearby mountain and came back with some snowballs. They have a snowball fight and then their first kiss. Ah, isn't that cute?
So adorbs.
Indeed, totes adorbs. So, the next chapter establishes that Arthas and Jaina were keeping their dalliances a secret, in order to avoid the rumour mill. Although this chapter is from Arthas' perspective, and it specifically says that they never discussed it out loud. So it's entirely possible poor Jaina actually has no idea what Arthas is doing. He memorised her schedule so that he could bump into her, and we join them during one such moment in a hallway. Just as they start their liaison, Chaol walks in behind Jaina to return a book that she dropped. Chaol doesn't react particularly well, although, honestly, he's more annoyed that they're keeping it a secret. He asks if Arthas is ashamed of Jaina, says a whole thing about how, if you were a real man, you'd court her openly and all this sort of stuff. Arthas explains that he doesn't want to give grist to the rumour mill, and Chaol leaves. Then there's this exchange between Jaina and Arthas. Jaina says, "Oh, sorry, Arthas, I should have told you." And Arthas immediately goes into whiny, spoiled prince mode. "Told me what? Are you and he? You can hear him like working himself up into a frustrated, jealous rage over nothing. And Jaina says no, but she thinks that Chaol maybe wanted to. She says he's a good man and a powerful mage and a prince, but he's not. Now, I think 97% of reasonable people who speak English would understand where she's going with that sentence. But Arthas cuts her off mid-sentence and says, he's not what? And the book says, the words came out sharper than he had intended. Chaol was so many things Arthas wasn't. Older, more sophisticated, experienced, powerful, impossibly physically perfect. He felt jealousy growing inside him in a cold, hard knot. If Chaol had reappeared at that moment, Arthas wasn't so sure he wouldn't take a swing at him. Obviously, Jaina finishes her sentence with what she was always going to say, which is, he's not you. At which point everything is fine. But fucking hell, Arthas. Like, major anger management issues there.
Yeah, that should have been a major red flag, Jaina, right there.
Yeah.
But at this point, she's a teenager, and we all make bad decisions when we're teenagers.
We do. Now,
like slaughtering a whole city, but we'll get there.
Spoilers. So, we then cut to Arthas' training with Uther briefly. Uther is telling him that it's important to pray and stuff like that, so that he can commune with the light, and then he can heal people instead of just hurting people, because, you know, he's a paladin, not a warrior, and he keeps forgetting that. We then get a look into Arthas' thoughts at the time. Now, bear in mind, Uther is talking to him about healing people, right? Arthas thought about Invincible. His thoughts always drifted to the horse in winter, and Uther's comment only reminded him yet again of what he regarded as the one failure in his entire life. If only he'd begun training earlier, the great white stallion would still be alive. He had never revealed to anyone exactly what happened on that snowy day. They still believed it was an accident. And it was, Arthas told himself. He hadn't deliberately intended to harm Invincible. He loved the horse. He would sooner have harmed himself. And it's just fucking delusion and an inability to, like, take responsibility for his own bullshit. So the year turns on, and we see Jaina come to visit Arthas in Lordaeron for Noblegarden, which is basically Warcraft's version of Easter. He then asked her to visit for the Midsummer Fire Festival, but she couldn't. She said it was too busy a time in Dalaran. So he said he'd visit her for Midsummer instead. Not that he was actually invited, and, you know, she's going to be busy, but he doesn't care. And that she would visit him for Hallow's End. Jaina said she'd try, and Arthas said, no, you'll come. Leaving aside the obvious innuendo there, what a bossy motherfucker, right? Now, at Hallow's End, when Jaina did indeed visit, you'll notice that I'm not using the word Arthas used, Arthas had her light the Wicker Man effigy for the commoners using her magic. There's a whole thing where he says they're going to want her to do it every year from now on, and she asks whether that would be a problem. And he says it wouldn't. Spoiler alert, yes it would. Then they make love for the first time, and afterwards Jaina says, no one can seem to deny you anything, she murmured, repeating the words she had said to him the day of their first kiss. Least of all me. He then clutched her to him, a sudden cold shivering over him, though he had no idea why. Don't deny me, Jaina. Don't ever deny me. Please. What the fuck? Like, is anybody listening to this podcast going to honestly tell me that if their partner said, don't ever deny me, on your first proper night together, or even on your 10th proper night together, that wouldn't be a bigger fucking red flag than the one the Scarlet Crusade carry around?
Fuck, I think you could be together 10 years and say that, and it's still a red fucking flag.
Exactly. Don't ever deny me. Fuck off, man. Jesus. And also bear in mind that, and it wouldn't be any better if she was, but Jaina's not some commoner. You know, she's not actually one of his subjects or any of that shit. Like, she is legitimately the daughter of a ruler of a nation in her own right. Like, they are on a very similar level in terms of social power and what have you. And he still bosses her around like a fucking peasant.
And so even in their martial prowess, she's the apprentice of one of the strongest mages. He's the apprentice of one of the strongest paladins. Like,
yeah,
they are two sides of the same coin.
Absolutely.
Except one's a douchebag and one's not.
Well, we'll see. Wait till we get to the Jaina episode.
Yeah, but remember, I like Jaina.
Yeah, but I write the notes. Now, so, listen, I know that I went really pretty hard on Arthas in that last chapter. And all that Arthas bashing would probably be something I'd need to apologise for. If he didn't do an excellent job of confirming everything I just said straight away. Right? So, that was the All Hallows Eve festival thing, Hallows Eve, right? That's their version of Halloween. Winter Veil is next, so Christmas. So we're talking 2 months away, right? As that starts to happen and they're doing all the prep for this festival, Arthas comes to realise that Jaina is starting to be treated like a member of the royal family. His mother takes Jaina dress shopping to make sure she's coordinated with herself and Kalia, something that's never happened before. There's then an entire scene where Jaina and Arthas are overlooking the frozen Lake Laudermere, and an entire paragraph is devoted to how amazing, how stunning, how heartbreakingly lovely Jaina looks. And this is a paragraph from Arthas's point of view. He touches her hair and says that she's like a white candle, all white and gold. She says, yes, the children will almost certainly be blonde. And Arthas loses his shit. He has an absolute fucking mental breakdown. Tells her that he's not ready, they're too young, he's got training to finish, so is she, and maybe they could just be friends. He then wonders why everything bad seems to happen during winter. Honestly, Arthas, the reason everything bad seems to happen during winter is because you're a fucking dick. Like, I can't blame the Chapter 1 stuff on you. You know, I can't blame the Chapter 1 stuff where the orcs wrecked Stormwind. That's probably not his fault. But everything else that's happened in winter in this book, from Invincible's death, to him dumping Jaina for no fucking reason, to everything that's going to happen in Northrend in the next episode, right? All of that is on him. He is the reason bad things happen when it's cold. Look at the fucking Wrath of the Lich King expansion. Jesus Christ. It's all on him. Sorry. So, after he breaks Jaina's heart, we then cut to Aedelas Blackmore, who you might remember from our Thrall episode and the last episode of this show. He is currently getting his bollocks ripped off verbally by King Tyrannus for letting Thrall escape, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy, honestly. Arthas asks to go hunt down some orcs so that he can get his frustrations out. Clearly killing, and this is a direct quote, greenskins, as he calls them, is just much more fun than being Jaina's husband, right? Like, in terms of how you're going to get your frustration out, you could be married to Jaina, or you could kill orcs. So yeah, he chooses killing orcs. Poor Jaina.
Did he, go buy a white robe and hood at this time, too?
Jesus Christ. No, he's not a clothy, he's a plate wearer, remember? This guy is a paladin.
Oh, right.
Are we getting Anduin and Arthas confused again?
Yeah.
No, so... Yeah, I was trying to think of some way of getting the initials there to mean something, but I'm just going to leave that. So, the next chapter, Chapter 9, we have a time skip of around 3 years. We're at Warcraft 3 now, people. That's kind of where we are. Jaina overhears the Prophet, who is Medivh, telling Antonidas to get the fuck out of the Eastern Kingdoms. Antonidas ignores that warning, obviously. Antonidas then tells Jaina about a plague, which he thinks is probably magical in nature, and says that she needs to go and investigate it. Her days of doing apprentice shit are done. Go and be a mage. He's even got her a pocket tank, an envoy for the journey. Wonder who that could be. I'm not going to drag this out too much, it's Arthas. So, they meet up, and Jaina ganks some ogres on the way, which is very impressive. And when they stop to make camp, Arthas talks his way back into Jaina's heart, and her bedroll. Although it does say that they weren't intimate, it also says that that's only because there were soldiers present. So, the next chapter, Arthas, Jaina and the men reach some farmhouses and investigate. And they find undead. A whole shitload of undead. Now, none of these people have ever seen the undead before at this point. This was not something that was common at all. You know, in fact, the only necromancer that Jaina had ever heard of was Kel'Thuzad, who'd been kicked out of Dalaran 5 years previous. Spoiler alert, that's relevant. So they find all these undead. Jaina burninates the crap out of them, and burns the farmhouses for good measure. Then they discover that the area around the granary is blighted. Then they find some necromancers, and they fight their first abomination. This is presented as a massive, shocking thing in the book. You know, we see them as enemies in the game all the time, don't we? But this is the first time an abomination has ever been in game in any way, really. So the necromancers escape, and Arthas vows to track them to Underhole, which is the source of the grain. So, long story short, they figure out that the plague is magical, it's being spread via tainted grain, and the dead people are being raised as zombies, probably by necromancers. That's kind of where Arthas' head is at this point. So in the next chapter, they get to Underhole, and they find Kel'Thuzad there, the necromancer who's running the show. Kel'Thuzad tells him that he has a boss, the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis, who can be found at Stratholme. Dreadlord means nothing to anybody at this stage. Arthas is like, I don't know what the fuck a Dreadlord is, but I do know what my hammer does. And he beats the shit out of Kel'Thuzad. But unfortunately the grain had already been distributed. So time for another horse ride. I'm pretty sure Arthas is quite happy here. He's getting to do a lot of horse riding. They head towards a town called Hearthglen. Jaina is very, very tired at this point. Arthas wants to ride all night without stopping, so she tries. That's not a euphemism. Get your heads out of the gutter. I'm talking about horses.
Which is probably the same for Arthas, let's be real.
Yeah, true that, yeah. The reason he doesn't want to get off the horse is so that he doesn't have to stand up straight. So 4 hours later, though, Jaina falls asleep in the saddle and starts to fall off the horse. She rights herself and just sits there trembling for several minutes. You can imagine what this is like, you know, if you've ever nodded off in the car or anything like that. You know, she has had this moment of, holy shit, I just nearly fell off the horse while I was asleep. I could have died. You know, she's sitting there trembling. And Arthas eventually notices that she's fallen behind. And he comes back and asks her what's wrong. And she says, you know, she needs to stop. Arthas is frustrated and asks how long she needs. She says, long enough to eat something and rest for a bit. Arthas helps her get down from the horse, and she takes out some cheese, expecting him to go and tell the men that they'd be taking a break. Instead, he just sits down next to her, and it says that impatience radiated from him like heat from a fire. Jaina reaches out to touch his face, and he takes that as her being done. So he says, "You done?" And she's literally taken one bite of cheese at this point. She's been sitting down for less than a minute. They have a little argument about his temperament and the way he seems to be getting a bit obsessed, and then he decides it's time to go. Jaina got 2 bites of fucking cheese and maybe 2 minutes rest. Seriously, Arthas, what the fuck? You know, this is someone who's supposed to be, like, becoming a leader of men and all this kind of shit, and he can't tell that... I barely even fucking have words for this. So, they get to Hearthglen, and there's this literal army of undead. One of the soldiers there also tells him that the village has been fed with bread made from the grain nearby, which is the Underhole grain. So Arthas sends Jaina to fetch Uther and the knights via a portal, because he knows he can't take an entire army of the undead by himself. Then he realises the truth. The plague isn't just killing people to be reanimated later by necromancers. The grain reanimates the people itself. That's why these people have all died and come straight back as, you know, the undead. The bread was doing it. So Arthas and his men do their best to fight the undead army, and they actually manage to last until Uther relieves them. After the battle, there are bodies everywhere, but Jaina notices that Arthas is focused on the body of a horse. I'll let you all insert your own joke there. Uther walked up to his student and clapped Arthas on the shoulder. I'm going to give you the exact quotes from the book here, right? So, Uther says, "I'm surprised you kept things together as long as you did, lad." It says, "His voice was warm with pride and a smile was on his lips. If I hadn't arrived just then..." Arthas whirled. "Look, I did the best I could, Uther." Both Uther and Jaina blinked at his harsh tone of voice. He was overreacting. Uther wasn't censuring him, he was praising him. If I'd had a legion of knights riding at my back, I would have... Such a petulant fuck, right? So he misinterprets Uther's praise, decides to take it as an attack, and the two of them have a massive argument. And Arthas basically breaks off the argument and says, "Well, I'm going to Stratholme to kill Mal'Ganis." Uther says, "It's too much to do alone. you can't do this by yourself. And Arthas says, feel free to tag along then, and leaves. I mean, that's actually kind of badass. Uther and Jaina then have a little chat, and Jaina decides to follow Arthas while invisible. It's interesting some of the implications in the way Uther phrases things there, actually. So what Uther actually says to Jaina is basically that it's not safe to follow Arthas in the mood that he's in. And I think that's quite telling because, Uther knows Arthas pretty well at this point. Uther trained him. And I think Uther probably has a pretty good idea of the kind of person Arthas is. And, Uther's approach here isn't actually that you shouldn't be following him, it's that it might not be safe to follow him. And that worries me a bit, to be honest. But yeah, so Jaina goes invisible anyway and follows Arthas. On the ride to Stratholme, Arthas is pissed. There's a bit of a theme here, isn't there? He kicks his horse for not going fast enough. In fact, it specifically says the reason he kicks the horse is for not being invincible. Poor horse, Like, it's not the animal's fault that you killed your last horse, dickhead. He's so busy being angry and kicking his horse that he nearly runs over a man in the road, who turns out to be Medivh, or the Prophet, or whatever we're calling him now. Pardon me, he gets the whole doom and gloom speech that Antonidas and Tyrannus had before him, and he thoroughly ignores it. Then Jaina pops up and tells him that Antonidas had the same speech, and she's starting to think that maybe the Prophet is right. She then makes the fatal mistake of starting a sentence with the words, "Arthas, you shouldn't." Arthas is sick of being told what to do, and tells Jaina that if she won't support him, she can just leave. She says that he needs her, and he apologises, and does an entire 180 on his mood again, says that he's always glad of her company. That night they stop to eat. Arthas doesn't manage to eat any bread, in fact even the thought of doing that makes his throat close up, but he does manage to be intimate with Jaina again, so he's got his priorities straight at least.
Oh my god. Like, if they had, mental health professionals in Azeroth at this time, Arthas might have turned out very differently, because he's clearly got some fucking issues.
Yeah, you're not wrong. He definitely needed more help than he got. And actually, when you get around to the, I think everyone listening's probably done it by now, the 9.1 content revolving around Uther. And Uther says there, that he wishes he'd said a few things differently to Arthas. And that actually, if he'd listened to some of the things Arthas said, and if he'd responded differently to some of the things Arthas said, maybe everything that happened wouldn't have happened. So yeah, I mean, who knows? Maybe Uther's going to find a way of founding a psychiatry service or something now. I don't know. But yeah, so we're now on to chapter 12 of the book, and this is the second to last chapter we're going to cover today. And it is a doozy. So we start with Jaina waking up. Do we think that getting his rocks off last night would have made Arthas a more cheerful boy? Do we?
I mean, for most people it would, but I'm going to guess since it's Arthas, no.
No is correct. He is still being a little bitch. He says... Well, basically, he tells her about his hypothesis about the grain making the zombies. And he explains that he couldn't just sit around knowing that. So he does start to kind of give her a decent explanation of why he's been thinking the way he's been thinking and what he's been doing. But then he ruins it by getting grumpy again because Uther didn't ride all night to catch up with him. There's then a fairly iconic conversation just outside of Stratholme, which I think most of us have heard before. But in case you haven't...
Glad you could make it, Uther.
Watch your tone with me, boy. You may be the prince, but I'm still your superior as a paladin.
As if I could forget. Listen, Uther. There's something about the plague you should know. Oh no. We're too late. These people have all been infected. They may look fine now, but it's just a matter of time before they turn into the undead. This entire city must be purged.
What? How can you even consider that? There's got to be some other way.
Damn it, Uther. As your future king, I order you to purge this city.
You are not my king yet, boy. Nor would I obey that command even if you were.
Then I must consider this an act of treason.
Treason? Have you lost your mind, Arthas?
Have I? Lord Uther, By my right of succession and the sovereignty of my crown, I hereby relieve you of your command and suspend your paladins from service.
Arthas, you can't just...
It's done!
So, Arthas and a bunch of his men follow through with it. They purge Stratholme, and they kill every man, woman and child within its walls, regardless of whether they'd turned or not. And hey, a lot of them had, but a lot of them hadn't too. He killed a buttload of innocents that day, and at some point his hammer stopped glowing with the light. Obviously Arthas doesn't take that as criticism of what he's doing at all. Arthas actually says, maybe even the light regretted the grim necessity of what we were doing. Really? Really? No. So eventually Arthas comes face to face with Mal'Ganis. There's a whole description of Mal'Ganis because, you know, he's a dreadlord, and obviously Arthas has never seen anything quite like him before. Mal'Ganis tells Arthas to meet him in the Arctic continent of Northrend, and then pieces out via teleportation. Arthas is not impressed. The direct quote in the book says, Arthas cried out incoherently, swinging his faintly glowing hammer at empty air. I'll hunt you down to the ends of the earth if I have to. Do you hear me? To the ends of the earth! Manic, raging, screaming, he swung his hammer wildly at nothing until sheer exhaustion alone forced him to lower it. He propped it up and leaned on it, sweating, shaking with raw sobs of frustration and anger. To the ends of the earth. Now, I considered stopping there for this episode because I thought it was a pretty good line to leave on. But chapter 13 is important because it sets up where we're going pretty well. Chapter 13 consists of Jaina wandering through the remains of Stratholme, thinking about a conversation she'd had with Arthas. He tried to guilt her into going to Northrend with him, reminding her that she said she'd never deny him. Then he left. Uther found Jaina in Stratholme and asked where Arthas was, where he'd taken the fleet. That's right. Arthas yoinked the entire royal fleet of Lordaeron and took it to Northrend to find Mal'Ganis, without permission of his father or Uther or anybody like that. And so that's where we're going to leave the story here today. So Arthas has murdered an entire city full of people, and then he has dragooned his entire nation's navy to go and find a demon in Northrend. How's that going to go for him? So, next time on Arthas Ball Z, Arthas' adventures in Northrend. What the fuck is Frostmourne anyway? And whatever happened to good old King Tyrannus? And that's all in the first 10 minutes or so. We're going to find out about the Lich King. There's all kinds of cool shit coming. And I mean, there's a very real possibility we're going to end up needing an episode 4 for this at the moment, because Arthas' story is nowhere near done.
No, we're barely halfway. We might not even be halfway.
I think chronologically we're not, but I think in terms of events that need, like, detail. Like, I think we're going to find, very similarly to, you know, when Morally Grey caught up with the game, and suddenly things became a lot quicker. It'll be like that for us, I think. Once we hit the Wrath portion, it'll start to go quite quickly, Streamline. I think, yeah. But yeah, so that's where we are with the Arthas book at the moment. There are still a couple of chapters left of part 2, but I think they fit better with part 3 because they're very much part of what comes next as opposed to what came before, I think.
Yeah, I think Stratholme is kind of the line in the sand of he was a paladin and now he's not.
Yeah, Stratholme's definitely the moment where he did the bad shit. You know, Stratholme is the moment where he first comes into contact with Mal'Ganis. You know, Stratholme is the moment where I think he stops being the Golden Prince and starts being something a bit different. And I mean, the culling of Stratholme is something that has been discussed so many times by so many people. And what I find really interesting is that whenever I listen to anyone discussing it, they always come out with different opinions on it. You know? So, I mean, where do you stand on it? What do you think?
I feel like it's kind of complicated because he didn't go in there He went in there with anger at Mal'Ganis, but he had pity for the people living there. And was there a better option? Could they have quarantined the city? Maybe tried to figure out a cure? It's possible, but he was also, I think, doing what he felt was the only way to stop the spread of the plague.
Yeah, I absolutely think that he, rightly or wrongly, I think Arthas absolutely thought he was doing the right thing. I don't think there's much doubt of that. I think that the thing I come back to is that at no point did anybody ever try using the light, for example, to heal the people who've had the bread or the grain or whatever. It was never tried.
Right, and when Jaina touched the dirt around the granary and her hand started to churn, he healed it with the light.
Yes, and in the same chapter, though, or the chapter after, there's a moment where someone who is starting to turn reaches out for him for healing, and he hits them with a hammer instead. And I mean, when he said it that bluntly, it sounds quite funny. But actually, he didn't try to heal the guy at all.
Yeah.
And because he didn't try, we don't know if it would have worked at all. You know?
Right, and you would, if he was thinking logically, which is not his strong suit, no, there is very much a chance they could have used the light to start healing people, because it did heal Jaina.
And also, healing is not something Arthas is great at, right? That's established. Uther is. And if Arthas had stopped and had a proper conversation with Uther, and actually, you know, deferred to his mentor, maybe something could have been done, you know? And we will never know. And I think that's part of the stuff that happened in 9.1 with Uther, with his flashbacks and his memories. You know, part of what I took from that is that even Uther acknowledges now that we will never know, you know? Like, Uther tries, when he revisits that memory, where his memories get all mushed together, Uther tries to fix things. You know, he tries burning the grain and what have you. And he realises that so many people have turned that he can't do anything about it. And that's his memory and his... You know, the memories all blending together and what have you, so they're not accurate. But he does come out of it feeling that, like, the best thing he could have done would actually just have been to listen to Arthas better and talk to Arthas better, not something militarily around Stratholme. It does seem as though Uther kind of accepts Stratholme as a necessity now. And I'm just not sure whether that's really the case or not. But yeah, it would have been nice to have actually seen conclusively whether a paladin or a priest would have been able to heal these people, because as it is, we just don't know. We do know.
And to make a...
Sorry, go on.
Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was going to go off topic, so
okay.
A little bit.
Well, I was just going to say that one thing that Mal'Ganis says when Arthas confronts him as well, he says something along the lines of, I will now go from neighbourhood to neighbourhood turning these people. And that kind of implies that some of them hadn't had the bread. It kind of implies that Mal'Ganis was planning on doing some of it personally. Which means if he'd just come in and killed the undead and fought Mal'Ganis, there would have been survivors. At least arguably. But he didn't know that until he got there. And that's the problem, you know. That's the problem when you kill a bunch of innocents before you actually get to the bad guy. Yeah, it's just hard, isn't it? It's a really difficult moral problem, and I think it probably hits a little bit harder now post-COVID. You know, we've all been in this situation where it's one thing having lockdowns, but you know, I don't think a vaccine is really something that was going to be happening in the World of Warcraft, unfortunately.
Yeah, I would say it's one of the most one of the most morally gray situations that happens in Warcraft, because you can kind of see both sides, and was it a shitty thing to do? Yes, but can you 100% fault Arthas on this part? Maybe not.
No, and I think the thing with Arthas is, when people talk about Arthas and his motivations and whether he's a good character or a bad character, one of the things that people always talk about is how much of what he does is him and how much of what he does is outside influence, right? And I have heard podcast hosts who normally get along very well fall out massively over that argument. And all I'll say on it is, up to the point in the story where we've stopped, there is no outside influence on Arthas. At this moment in time, he has never heard the whispers of the Lich King. He has never heard of Frostmourne, let alone touched it. He has very vaguely... Kel'Thuzad wound him up and told him there was a demon. You know, that's about it. He has been told that there is a bigger fish to fry somewhere, but there's no one coercing him. There's no one changing him at this point. He's just
he's being somewhat manipulated, but he's not being dominated.
Yeah, he's being manipulated in the way that you'd been manipulated if I said to you, you know, you're not going to stream on Twitch this week. I don't think you'll do it. You know, it might make you more likely to do it. It might make you less likely to do it. But I'm not making you do it. You know? And I think that's an interesting one. And when we get to next week's episode, we will start to see Arthas be actually manipulated by people. We will start to see external forces exert their will on him. And we will start to see how he changes. But it's interesting that so far, we've done 2 episodes on Arthas. And generally speaking, the perception of his character hasn't been good. And he hasn't been manipulated by anybody yet, really. He's completely under his own control, and he's a bit of a douchebag.
Yeah. Yeah, to make a Star Wars comparison, this feels very Attack of the Clones Anakin.
Yeah.
He's whiny, he's entitled... He's strong and he knows it, and he thinks he deserves more than he's getting because of it.
Yeah.
And then he goes and slaughters an entire village.
Yeah.
But Anakin almost had a better reason for that.
I mean, Padme could have done so much better. And Jaina could have done so much better. And then, well, actually, but then Jaina goes on to not do so much better, because Kalak isn't... anyway. But yeah. So I think, unless you've got something else...
Yeah, I think that about does it.
So yeah, I think that wraps us for episode 2. So yeah, next episode we will be travelling to Northrend with Arthas. We will be seeing what happens with that. We will be finding out about Frostmourne, and we will we will definitely be meeting Sylvanas Windrunner as well. So that should be fun.
I'll be meeting her tonight. It's raid night. We're going for AOTC.
Oh, good luck. Fingers crossed.
We got to her last week, and that's a rough fight.
I wouldn't know. I haven't even hopped into LFR yet.
You're on LFR right now, sir.
That I am, actually. Why isn't I haven't had a loot drop yet, though. So yeah, I think if you want to wrap us up, bud.
I am being overwhelmed! Assist me!
So, as always, if you guys want to know where you can find us, you can find me on Twitter at Sirithe. You can find Dracoris at Smiting Titan. You can find the show at LFR Wowcast. You can email us at lfrwowpod@gmail.com. And if you want to join our amazing patrons from earlier, you can find us at patreon.com/LFRWowcast. Thank you guys again so much for listening. We'll be back with you guys in the next 2 weeks for part 3 of Arthas. Bye-bye.
See ya.
I am very uncomfortable with the energy that we've created in the studio today.